fast the shadows slip, catching moonlight on the rip. Moments come like whispered dreams, louder than the silent screams. Blurry faces in the night, frozen frames in morning light. Look at that, the world reveals secrets kept behind the wheels. Caught in a moment, here we fly, blinking, we're touching the sky. Every heartbeat, every glance, join the world in this wild dance. Photographs and hidden smiles, traveling the unseen miles. Lights spark like a flickered thought, caught in things we never saw. Caught in a moment, here we fly, blinking, we're touching the sky. Every heartbeat, every glance, join the world in this wild dance. Every second rides its tail, flashes where our thoughts can sail. Life is caught on borrowed time, captured in a perfect rhyme. Caught in a moment, here we fly, blinking, we're touching the center in the sky. Every heartbeat, every glance, join the world in this wild dance. In this wild dance. Every second writes its tale, flashes where our thoughts can sail. Life is caught on borrowed time, captured in a perfect rhyme. Yesterday's shadows danced on the wall, pictures and moments I can still recall. Faces of laughter, whispers of joy. Yesterday's echoes, they never destroy. We sat by the river, sun sinking low. Time seemed to vanish, it felt so slow. Hand in hand together, hearts so light. Yesterday's memories still hold me tight. Oh, yesterday, how you haunt my mind. In the corners where the light can't find, pieces of love and fragments of tears. In yesterday's arms I have no fears. The leaves, they rustle, a silent song, reminding me of days that are long gone. Footprints left in the sands of time, yesterday's whispers in every rhyme. sepia tales, they whisper low. Dusty frames where memories glow. Time stands still in these captured lines. Lenses freeze the fleeting signs. Silent faces, stories untold. Moments frozen, worth more than gold. Shadows and light, a timeless mix. History etched in pixel flicks. Frames of time caught so divine. Legends live forever enshrined in the still eyes wide open. History speaks, bonds unbroken. Glimpses of wars, whispers of peace. Laughter and tears, endless release. Heroes framed, their courage shown. In each shot, legacy sown. Horizons dance in monochrome hues. Morning's promise, evening's news. Generations in a flash of light. Yesterday's dreams burning bright. Broken sighs and lovers' gaze. Childhood scenes in summer's haze. Each print a silent choir song. Sings of where we all belong. Walking through the twilight mist, whispers of the past persist. Echoes of a love once clear, fading like a distant cheer. Days of laughter, nights so bright, dancing neath the silver light. Holding hands beneath the trees, softly swaying with the breeze. Memories of yesterday haunt my dreams, they never stray. Linger still the taste of you, moments frozen in the dew. Letters tucked in old shoebox, time has loosened all the locks. Photographs and worn out clothes, secrets only you'd suppose. Counting stars on velvet skies, glimmers in your soulful eyes. Promises we swore we'd keep, now they're sinking out of reach. Memories of yesterday haunt my dreams, they never stray. Linger still the taste taste of you, moments frozen in the dew. Letters tucked in old shoebox. Time has loosened all the locks. Photographs and worn out clothes. Secrets only you'd suppose. Lemons frozen in the dew. In the whisper of the morning breeze, I hear your words float through the trees. Yesterday's echoes haunt my soul, fragments of love that took a toll. Soft shadows dance upon my wall, traces of laughter that I recall. The silence now feels loud and clear, a distant memory that brings me near. Yesterday's echoes made me cry.